Good morning. We've been studying in the book of Ecclesiastes, which is a very thought-provoking book. It's found in the wisdom literature section of our Old Testament, along with Psalms, which a lot of poetry and beautiful expressions of adoration of God can be found, and the book of Proverbs, where brief, pithy quips and quotes can be found on the wisdom of life. We'll look at a couple of those today as well. And then there's the book of Ecclesiastes, which is sort of a systematic philosophical treatise on an experiment on the meaning of life. In the context of the United Monarchy in which Solomon reigned for 40 years after his father David had reigned 40 years and fought to solidify a kingdom, Solomon reigned during a period of peace. His name, Shalomo, is very similar to shalom. You've heard of people say shalom, Shalomo. And so he is the Prince of Peace. He is the King of Peace. And of course, Jesus came through that lineage. And he has all the, from a spiritual perspective, the regal qualities of king, like David, and the qualities of peace with Solomon. Only in the case of Solomon, it was literal peace, very little military conflict. In the case of Jesus, it's spiritual peace and reconciliation with God. So there's a lot of things to think about there, but it's in that context of peace that Solomon had a lot of time on his hands to reflect. He also had a lot of resources. You know, there are things, when computers first came out, there was, things that I wanted to get and I just couldn't afford them. And through the process of time, prices, of course, came down and I could finally get my hands on a hard drive or some other kind of thing that I might have been optic drive or something I was looking at. And so my ability to experiment and think about things related to technology has always been limited. Solomon had no such limitations. Solomon had the capability to pursue whatever interest he had. We talk about in our economy discretionary spending. If the consumer is spending and buying out in restaurants and taking vacations and buying airplane tickets and different things like that, we call that discretionary. Or if they're visiting Orlando and some of the theme parks, we call that discretionary because it's not food, shelter, and clothing and transportation, which they need. We have needs and we have wants. And so discretionary is more of what we would like to have. Solomon had no such limitations. So he proposes, I set my heart to know about what it was good for the sons of men to do all the vain days of their lives that they're living on the earth under the sun. And he pursues that thought systematically. And we were looking at the first few chapters and talking about pleasure. The proposition is maybe life is just to get all the gusto and pleasure you can. And he realized with his experience and vast resources that too was a dead end. Or maybe just the accumulation of wealth and money and power. And he thought maybe that's the idea and the goal of life. And he realized that also was vanity and a striving after the wind. And so that's what kind of book we're looking at. And we've been exploring it, and we've been discovering that he seems to be painting a rather negative picture, until he intersperses a few thoughts about God throughout this document. And then at the end, he gives us the perspective or the framework in which we should understand all of this after all has been said and done. After all of the resources that have been spent and all of the thoughts have been thought and expressed, to serve God and keep his commandments is the whole duty of mankind. And so today, that brings us to chapters 3 and 4. We'll be looking at that section of Ecclesiastes today, and we'll begin with a word of prayer, shall we? Heavenly Father, we come before Thee at this time, and we're thankful for the opportunities that You've given us today. This gorgeous Lord's Day morning, we appreciate Your care over our lives and the things that You have provided for us that sustain our lives, that give us the portion of health that we enjoy, and the opportunity to assemble together today in this place. We appreciate every physical and material blessing that You have given to us. We're also mindful of the spiritual blessings that You have given to us, including Your Word. And we pray that as we examine it today, that You would bless us and that we would be encouraged and we would be built up in the faith, and we would understand a little bit more about our place in this world and how we can make a difference as we serve You. Be with all of our young children and teenagers as they're in the various classes and the teachers that are helping them to learn. We ask that You would bless each one. We also are mindful of all of Your people throughout the world, wherever they may be assembled on this Lord's Day. We ask that You would bless each one. For we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. And so as we look at the end of chapter 3, what does the gain that is happening from the worker, all of his toil? He says, I've seen the business that God has given to the sons of men to be busy with. He has made everything beautiful in its time, and He has put eternity into man's heart so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. And we've talked about this idea once or twice already. God has put eternity in the hearts of the sons of men, of human beings. What do you think? How would you describe that in your own words? What does that mean? Yeah, Juan? This is not our end place. This is not our only home. All right, good. I like that. Anyone else add to that idea? Okay, so throughout history, people have always sought for something higher than us. That's what Sandy's saying. We don't want to die. Okay, so we're aware of that eventuality, right? In fact, chapter 7, he talks about the fact that it's a good thing for us to go to the house of mourning sometimes because the living will take it to heart and realize that that's our end as well. So because we have, let's just contrast this for a moment. If the bees flying around gathering pollen and making honey, and do the bees know what's going to happen tomorrow or the following? No. Porpoises, we talk about the language that they have and so forth. Do the porpoises build hospitals or talk about philosophy or the end of the world? Or no, the porpoises don't. Humans do. Homo sapiens, if you want to use that terminology. Human beings understand their predicament. We sometimes talk about the human condition. And this is, people that read literature and talk about different things in that way. In the humanities, we realize that the thing about people is that we have an understanding of our situation. We realize that there was some things that happened before we arrived to the scene. We also know that there's going to be a time when we live our lives to its complete end and we die, and that there's most likely, in the event of Jesus' return, this changes. But outside of that possibility, after we're gone, things will continue, right? And that causes some perplexion on us. We say, well, why is that? How come? Well, God has put eternity in our hearts because that allows us to seek more than just what's under the sun. That the life of human beings is more than just gathering food, finding a place to hide under the rain when it comes, and just taking care of the moment-to-moment needs. There's something more. And as Sandy was saying, there's always been civilizations throughout the world that have pursued these things, that there's something else beyond this life. It is true that there has never been any society or civilization that did not believe in another life after this life was over. You go back to the Egyptians and the pharaohs and the magnificent burial practices that they had, the mummification process, all of these things, King Tut and all the different creature comforts that they buried in the tomb with him so that he would have stuff to do in the next life. All of these societies, you can go to different places where the Aborigines were, different continents of the globe. You can go into the caves of Spain or in France where they have these, what's considered the oldest artwork that's ever been found, these paintings on the caves that have the outlines of cattle and different animals and man. Why? Because people were always thinking about things beyond themselves and the next life. And this passage shows us that actually God made us this way, that God put eternity in the hearts of human beings so that we would seek and look and grope after God and try to find him. And of course, in the fullness of time, God sent forth his Son, born of woman. And Jesus came into the world to seek and to save sinners. And that good news of the gospel is that although all of us have messed up from time to time and we've sinned, that we don't have to pay the ultimate consequence of that sin, but Jesus paid it instead for us. He made a substitution, a propitiation, or an atonement for us, so that he paid the price, just like we sing the song, he paid it all, and we don't have to. So we get that message out to people in different parts of the earth, and some people respond positively to that message. And it is obvious, ladies and gentlemen, when you look around and see what's going on everywhere, including here in the United States, that there is a tremendous amount of confusion and chaos and predicaments that people find themselves in, and they're looking. Our task, or our mission, should we choose to accept it, is to seek the seekers, to look for those who are searching for God. And God will, and if we pray for God to help us make these connections, then, it's like we say, be careful what you ask for, you'll get it. So you'll have those opportunities, and we need to be prepared and ready to follow through and to give that guidance and have those conversations and have that open dialogue. And even when we have those opportunities, it's not like every single person we speak with will have a positive reaction to the message we give, but some eventually will. And it's not for us to know, we sow the seeds, others water, but who gives the increase anyway? It's God that does that. So it's not our job to ensure the increase. God will ensure that. It's up to us to be pliable, malleable vessels of service, or as God describes elsewhere, He's the potter and we're the clay. And we even sing about this, mold me and make me, Master, today, so that we can be pleasing in His service. So this passage here, talking about eternity, this is the Hebrew word olam. It's found many times in the Old Testament that refers to forever or eternity. And so God has placed that in our hearts so that we might, search and look and strive and find something that's more than just, 3 square meals a day or however many people eat, and just the physical things. There's much more to life than just that. So if you look down at verse 14, I know that whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it or taken away from it. God has made it so in order that men should fear before Him. And so that's what we want to think about and to realize that which is has already been, that which is to be already has been, and God seeks what has been driven away so that we might search after Him. Moreover, looking at verse 16, I saw under the sun that in the place of justice, even there was wickedness, and in the place of righteousness, even there was wickedness. I would suggest that almost any random news item you could find on Twitter, YouTube, or if you still use newspapers, whatever newspaper or periodical you peruse, that you will find example after example of where you would expect something good to be, or righteousness or justice, there is wickedness and a distortion of truth. Almost without exception. It's very discouraging. I was talking with Sandy just yesterday about, the perspective of things since the summer of 2020 has been absolutely astounding to me. I've just been blown away by the things that I have seen since the summer of 2020. I'm not just talking about COVID-19, that was bad enough, but all of the things that have transpired since then have been just totally caught me by surprise, really. And of course, that brings me back to the text, brings me back to God's Word, that, there are things that sometimes transpire around us that we don't understand. Think about Job. His world totally turned upside down and was transformed. Did he know that was coming? Did he expect it? Was he even aware of the conversation between Satan and God in heaven? No. He had his own limited, little perspective of where he was sitting at this time when his friends came in the dust and the ashes. And of course, they seemed to think that they knew all the answers, which was not the case. If Eliphaz and Zophar and those guys, they would be giving interviews on some YouTube channel today, I'm sure, for sure. If they were around, talking and speaking and pontificating and explaining. And really, they had no clue either. So the point is to put our hope and our trust and our confidence in the things of God. That will give us the ability to face every day of life, as well as, just like the passage in Timothy, where godliness has the profit of the life which now is and the life which is to come, which of course we expect because God has placed eternity in our hearts, and we know there's something more than just this thing we call life on earth. And so in the place where there should have been justice, I saw there was wickedness, and in the place of righteousness, even there was wickedness. And I said in my heart, God will judge the righteous and the wicked, for he has appointed a time for every matter and for every work. I said in my heart, with regard to the sons of men, that God is testing them to show that they are but beasts. For the fate of the sons of men and the fate of the beast is the same. As one dies, so does the other. They all have the same breath, and man has no advantage over the beasts. All is vanity. Now, keep in mind, he's looking at it from his investigative perspective. He's looking at it like a scientist would look at it. Think about this. You have a dog or a cat. We had one for 18, 19 years. And last year, sometime she left us, There is a certain respiration. There's a lung system in the beasts and the animals. And at one point after the sickness advances, the breath stops. There's no inhalation and there's no exhalation. You compare that to humans, and there's a day when the breath stops, and there's no inhalation, there's no exhalation, there's no respiration. From a scientific perspective, you think, okay, this is one form of, this is an ant, this may be a canine or feline. This one over here is, we call it Homo sapiens, and it's the same thing. Looking at it from a purely physical perspective, we don't know. We don't see any difference, even though the Bible tells us that there is a difference, that there is a spirit or a soul within us. The Hebrew word is called nephesh. In the Greek New Testament, it's called pneuma, like pneumatics, like the tires you have on your cars, they're pneumatics. There's air in them that kind of keep it floating above the concrete and the asphalt. But the point is there's breath there. And so there's part of this breath that the New Testament and the Old Testament calls a spirit that goes back to God who gave it. But we don't see that scientifically. We can't prove that from an experimental perspective. We don't know that. And that's what Solomon is talking about here. He says on this next section, verse 21, if you drop down, who knows whether the spirit of man goes upward and the spirit of the beast goes down to the earth? So we don't know, we can't see that. Keep in mind that when we are translating these passages from the original languages, there are no punctuation marks or question marks. Sometimes these could be interpreted as declarative sentences, like, who knows that it is a fact that the spirit of man goes upward and the spirit of the beast goes down to the earth. You could read it that way as well. But either way, the point is the same, that we're able to look physically at a dying cat or dog or human and see something that's similar there. And then also when you bury this corpse and check back 100 years later, it's all dust. So everything goes back to the dust and the decay. The way they buried people in the New Testament, if you were fairly wealthy, is that you got placed inside a tomb until there was full body decay, and that all that remained were the bones. And then when the next kin of family passed, they took the bones that were on the ledge inside the cave and put them in a small little coffin called an ossuary, which if you go back into that part of the world and do some excavation, you'll find these. Many have been found. You can go to the major museums of the world and see what they look. They look like a coffin, only a smaller. You know, the size might be like this, so that the longest bone of your body would easily fit inside. And they just stacked the bones and the skull in the box. It's called an ossuary. We found one of these a few years ago with the name Caiaphas on it, like Caiaphas from the New Testament. So there's a lot of interesting things that we can talk about when we study those artifacts. But the point I'm making here is that the physical body that a human has and these other beasts have, there's a certain respiratory system that's not precisely the same, but similar, relatively speaking. And then there's a respiration that stops at death. And then there's an ultimate decay of the physical body where the material goes in back into dust. This can be hastened by cremation, of course, but in the end, it all goes back to dust. And so what he says here as he makes that observation in verse 22, he says, "So that I saw there's nothing better than that a man should enjoy his work, for that is his lot. For who can bring him to see what will be after him?" You think about people in your lifetime that have passed on, for example, before the year 2020. Many of them, right? They have no knowledge of COVID-19. They know no discussions about the irregularities that were discovered in, electoral processes in different places in 2020 or perhaps even 2022, and all of the discussions about, they have no knowledge of that. And, you might even think they're blessed because they don't have any knowledge of those things. But my point is that who can see what's going to come after him? No one. So the point is, you've heard the expression, make hay while the sun shines. Or John Wayne used to say, "You're burning daylight, let's get busy." While we have life, we need to be busy, and we need to get to work. We need to do what we can. We can't work after we're past this life, and we can't even see what's going on after this life. So there's nothing better than that a man should rejoice in his work. Let me talk a little bit about this idea here, and maybe even ask you a question as we start. What do you suppose it means when he says that a man, and I mean here just a human being, just, all languages of the world have made distinctions between gender, male and female. Most languages other than English, that is rather obvious. Everything, for example, in the Spanish language, every object has gender. This object is a masculine object. The pen that I have, there's two words for pen. One is feminine and one is masculine, but every single thing is masculine or feminine. In English, we don't do it that much. I've heard of sailors talking in an almost affectionate way about their boat. "Oh, she sails beautifully." She talks about the boat kind of in a feminine way. And a lot of boats you might see if you go down to the port, there's names that the people have placed on the ships, and almost without exception, these are feminine names. The Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, whatever, whatever name you want to use, almost always feminine names. But my point here is that this passage, when it says a man, is talking about both men and women. And it would be probably a good translation to say that there's nothing better for a person than he or she should rejoice in his work. I'm not really there yet to saying that a person should rejoice in their work, and the theys and so forth. We're going through that process now. Part of it is just semantics and linguistics. The other part is pure ideology that is false. And so we have that conversation in our culture going on right now. But having said that, what do you suppose it means that we should rejoice in our work? Yeah, Ed? Okay. So we should enjoy our work because it gives us the wherewithal to buy stuff that we like. Good observation. Anything else? Sandy? Okay. Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel that way about these hockey players, they get to play hockey or, pick your sport. They get to play baseball, they just go out there and throw the ball around. They have a lot of fun and they are rewarded handsomely for that. Like, who wouldn't like to do that? So, and you ever watch people, it doesn't matter what they are, maybe they're having a conversation on TV, they're celebrities or something. They look like they're having a wonderful time, they're excited, they're enjoying themselves. And we think, that would be nice, to have that kind of a job. And yet they're rewarded tremendously for it. So, yeah, I do think that we make two great discoveries in life. We discover what we like to do, whatever it is. And secondly, we discover what people will actually pay us for doing. And if you're one of those rare people that those are the same things, you're very blessed. I've considered myself that way. Yes, Ian? Time for everything, okay. Excellent point. Excellent point. What about a situation where, and there are society implications for this. People have talked about a universal income. Everybody just gets a government paycheck and you can stay home and watch video games all day if you want to. I find that real problematic from a variety of levels, okay? Surging crime is one of those things that I think would result. If a person is working 40, let's just use that number, 40 hours a week, that's at least 40 hours that they're not getting into trouble. That's one way to look at it, okay? That also does something for your body. You're working hard. It does take its toll, but you also are strengthened by it. Sometimes we get strong by doing these things. You think about some of the training programs that athletes put themselves through. I mean, just rigorous training, and of course the nutritional requirements that they are very strict on what they eat and things of this nature. Why are they doing this? Because they're focused on one particular thing. And so I think that there's value in work. I've always, I'll mention a couple of things here. I used to wash dishes at a restaurant when I was a teenager, and it didn't bother me at all. I was kind of interested in how does the restaurant work? What's going on behind? You see the front when you go in and you buy something and you eat something, and what's going on behind the scenes. And when I was working, I got to see what was going on behind the scenes. I says, wow, this is interesting. And also the fact is that when you put these dishes in this extremely hot water, they come out on the other side, they're pretty clean. I'm kind of pleased to know that, because when I eat on stuff, it's kind of nice that they were really, and so of course I had a fellow in his 60s that was washing dishes across from me, and he was, saying, Ray, you're getting pretty good at that. You're going to do really well for your whole career doing this. And I says, I don't think I'm going to do this for my whole life, but it's okay. And of course, I took him literally. He was just funning with me, having fun with me. He knew I wasn't going to be doing this for the rest of my life. Sandy and I were newlyweds, and we were working in a nursing home. And we took care of people and changed beds and raised them and lowered them from the bathtub and different kinds of things that needed to be done, feeding people that couldn't feed themselves. There's not a day in the different work that I have been doing in my life that I regret. I enjoyed it. Everything about those things. Now, I have to say, when I was doing this in the nursing home, my shift was from 5 a.m. to 9 a.m., so I didn't like that too much. But I got finished just before I can go back and study and go to school. But, so I say this because there's a movement now, you might have heard of this in the world, probably in the US more than anywhere else, where people are wanting to achieve financial independence and retire early. It's called the FIRE movement, okay? And you can go online and talk and see different people that are, oh yeah, I'm 45 years old and I don't have to work anymore in my life. And I'm thinking, 45? But what are you going to do? Go camping for another 40 years? What are you going to do with yourself? And I'm not going to. My point here isn't to talk about the finances of this. That I think there's two mistakes. This might be one extreme that's way on the one side of the spectrum, and there are probably the majority of people that have no clue, and they're not making any preparations for their future, and that's a bad mistake as well. But my point here is simply saying that work is valuable. We make a contribution. Find something to do, even if it's volunteer work at a shelter or a hospital and visiting people, going into children's hospitals and helping out and what can I do to be useful? Because in the end, that's what it is. It's not the T-shirt that says, "He that dies with the most toys wins." That's silly. Someone might rent a facility that could house 100 automobiles, and they just create a collection for themselves. I'm not going to condemn that outright. I suppose people can do what they wish. But at the same time, at the end of the day, here you are taking your last breath. You have 2 or 3 days to live, and you're reflecting back and saying, oh, yeah, I had a pretty good car collection. I don't know what's going to happen to it, but that's, in other words, what did you do with your life? Well, I had a good car collection. Yeah. That doesn't seem to be valuable to me. So you have to answer that question for yourself. But Solomon in this book is telling us that we need to really think about this, that it's important for us to spend time and thinking about each day, even if it's a working day, it's valuable for us. We can't come back after this life is over. I think about my father who work, I think is a single term that could describe his life. But he always made sure he was 20 or 25 minutes early before his shift started. He appreciated having that opportunity. He came from Mexico to come to this country so he could work. He didn't want a handout. He did not come for, freebies or anything like that. He wanted to make a difference and make a contribution. And he raised us to do the same kind of thing. Bring me my Jell-O toolbox, he would say. And of course, he couldn't say yellow. He said Jell-O. And he would carry that, and he would do different things, even when he was at home. He worked 2 jobs, and then he would come home and he would fix the house up. We did have occasions where we would take a Sunday afternoon and go to the park and play softball and do things like that. But think about what you're leaving behind with your children and grandchildren. Again, I saw all the oppressions that are practiced under the sun. And behold, the tears of the oppressed, they had no one to comfort them. On the side of their oppressors there was power, and yet there was no one there to comfort them. And I thought the dead who are already dead more fortunate than the living who are still alive. But better than them both is he who has not yet been, and has not seen the evil deeds that are done under the sun. Again, I want to mention that if you read this and ponder and brood over it, without thinking about the end game, it could be very depressing. He's making observations that we all can make observations of. And you say, yeah, that reminds me of what I was reading and seeing what was going on the other day. And that's right. And these things are timeless. Think about this. He's writing this 900 some years before Jesus was born. Here we are, the year 2023, after the current era started with Jesus. And the things that he was observing are the things that we are observing. And we see oppression, and we see injustice, and we see crime, and we see wickedness, and we see falsehood, and we see people in positions of power abusing their power and doing harm rather than good. And we are discouraged by that. He was too. And he couldn't do anything about it either. And he was very powerful. He's making these observations, and we can see that they are still valid. I saw all the toil and all the skill in work that come from a man's envy of his neighbor. This also is vanity and a striving after the wind. If a person is working hard just so that he gets to buy a bigger car or a bigger boat or a bigger house than the Joneses who live next door, I think he's misguided. But that has always been what people have done, or at least some people have done. That they were motivated to do their best and to work hard in order to just relatively win more than other people. And that doesn't, it doesn't seem to make sense there. On the opposite of that, look at verse 5. The fool folds his hands and eats his own flesh. So verse 4 is talking about someone who's industrious and works hard, but probably doing it for the wrong reason. And verse 5 is there's a guy that just doesn't work at all. He folds his hands. If you read the passage in the Proverbs, it talks about a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest. So shall your poverty come upon you like a robber. So let's look at this spectrum of work. Is it possible to work too much? Other side, is it possible to not work enough? Yes. On the other side, is it possible to work too much for the wrong reasons? Yes. Is it possible to, just recreate too much and just not do it? Yes, all of that. So I guess the balance is somewhere in the middle with the right attitude and disposition, of course. Better is a handful of quietness than 2 hands full of toil and a striving after the wind. So like a bird in hand is worth 2 in the bush, right? You've got 1 bird in your hand. You're not satisfied. You're looking at someone who has the 2 birds and you say, okay, I'm going to work hard and try to get the 2nd bird, and you're just working and striving and you're not enjoying what you have. So the point that I think he's getting at here is that it's better for a handful of quietness. And this is interesting coming from Solomon because he had more than 2 handfuls. He had a lot. He had 1,000 handfuls. But he says it's better for that than to just strive for always. I guess someone was saying to Rockefeller one time at his heyday, Mr. Rockefeller, how much is enough? And the answer, just a little bit more. In other words, it's never enough. It's never enough. Just a little bit more. You can never. The book here tells us that the eye is not filled with seeing and the ear is not filled with hearing. You're never satisfied. So maybe that's not the thing to be pursuing, at least with that enthusiasm. All right, we're out of time, but we're going to finish chapter 4 and also look at chapter 5. I know we're kind of looking at pieces of both chapters, but we will get caught up to where we're doing basically 1 chapter each week. Certainly in the next couple of weeks, I see that happening. I appreciate our conversation and our discussion. So as you read through the week, just by all means, think about these points and bring them to our attention when we study together. Thank you so much.